guys, welcome back to Tech Tip Tuesday. Today we're talking about brake master cylinders. They are the cause and effect of any bad braking system, but they're also the cause and effect of any good braking system. It all starts here and it all has to be right. If you don't have the master cylinder right, you can waive the performance of the rest of the system goodbye. All right, so diving right in. The first topic we want to cover is push rods. There's multiple styles of these master cylinders out there in the world, and as a result, a lot of them have different push rods. When connecting this to a factory style pedal, you have to be cognizant of the fact that a manual master cylinder kit is going to need a different pedal ratio than a power brake kit. And that is the diagram that I'm going to put on the screen now. If you understand any type of science and physics, you can understand the leverage is changed. As the push rod is connected closer to the fulcrum point of the pedal assembly, your leverage goes up. That essentially affects how hard and fast the push rod is pushing the piston into the bore. Of course, harder and faster is going to create more pressure. The next thing about push rods, because they are different and you're hooking to a factory pedal, they all need to be a different length. So within the kits that we sell here at Motion and TBM, we have dedicated brake plates with dedicated master cylinders that have a dedicated push rod length. Because the back end of these change and the style of push rod change, unless you have tools to cut and then dye new threads on here, turn new threads on your push rod, you're going to want to make sure you get the correct length for the actual master cylinder and pedal you're using. Simply stated, when the pedal is returned at neutral, you want to make sure that there's no preload on the push rod. If it's pushing the piston into the bore, you're already set up for failure. But I'll go ahead and dive in and show you how that happens and why that happens by showing you how this all works.
Cylinder, whether you have a single reservoir or dual reservoir, split, they all have a similar concept on how they're made. It's an old design. It works great. That's why it's not changed, but there are a few principles like anything mechanical that need to be followed. Let's dive into the reservoir. Again, today I'm going to show you, this is a dual Mopar master cylinder. This actually came on I think a 60s Mopar, and it's very commonly copied and used because it's a good design for most aftermarket brakes. There's a number of brands that make one just like this, and then Wilwood made this cast style master cylinder here with a built-in reservoir to kind of alleviate the issues of these plastic pieces leaking. There's a couple things to note here. So it's a very simple design. They actually have ports on both sides of their master cylinder, but a few things that you'll notice about how this thing works. There's two ports in each. There's a front and a rear. So they're both built essentially identical. There's a compensation port. This front port, even though it has a small orifice, is actually where fluid enters and exits the piston area or the compression area. This is the fluid is entering in here, and this cavity here where the springs are is actually where the pressure is being built. We'll jump into that here in a minute. This back is a bleeder port, basically exhausting the air that's being made, kind of similar to a PCV system on an engine. When these seals are moving back and forth, they can build up pressure, not in the pressure channels, so that just lets the air out of those. From there, you'll see if you take a look inside of here, it's just a simple bore with a specialized finish inside of it. The fluid enters in the top. It's compressed in these sections here, which is sealed off by these seals. The front doesn't have a seal. It actually just goes right off that front cap. And then it exits this port. So it's very simple. And you'll notice the deliberate placement of the orifice at the top. Everything you have to think about in a fluid master cylinder is getting the air out, because in hydraulics you need the fluid to work. The air is going to cause you issues anytime you have it. And then this one's built nearly identical. I think everybody has like their own play on port diameters, the orifice size on the top and sides. This one only has it, but as far as functionality, everything is identical for this. So you can see visually, or at least I'm a visual person, if we lay this thing about how it sits in here, you can see that the seal right here it's just barely behind the compensating circuit here. You can understand if somebody has a pedal incorrectly situated or preloaded, meaning not loose, it's going to push this thing forward just enough to cover up that port right there. When that port gets covered up, one of two things is going to happen. Depending on how you bled it, there might already be fluid in there, and meaning that if it's in front of it, it's going to hold pressure. The problem with that is it's not going to relieve the fluid to let the pressure back out, so you're going to have sticky brakes. The pads are going to ride on the rotor, and it's going to warp the rotor, or in the case of a TBM drag rotor, it's going to grow to the outside to the point where the rotor hits the caliper. That's designed to do that with heat, is to grow, but if you grow too much, it can hit the caliper. But of course, this is a misuse case. This is an issue. The other thing that can happen is if you don't bench bleed it ahead of time, and don't get me wrong, if you have this problem, it's never going to bleed correctly altogether. But if you don't bench bleed it ahead of time or at all properly, there's a chance if this gets in front of it that you'll never uncover this port, and as a result, you're never going to get any fluid in this circuit of the brakes. So that means that there's never going to be proper, adequate fluid in here to create pressure to operate your braking system. Remember, a brake only works as good as it is delivered pressure. Of course, there's pad and rotor design and stuff like that, but our first line of defense is making sure that the caliper has proper pressure, and it starts here. Even though you might think, there's not really any preload, the smallest amount, as you've seen, can make this seal actually cover up the port that fluid's pulling in. And when that happens, no more brakes. The correct length master cylinder brake push rod put in the correct pedal ratio is going to make or break how your brake system works. In regards to having the proper preload or settings on your push rod, slack is slack, so just make sure you adjust in your Heim. Usually you can just rotate that if you don't have a set nut, and make slack is slack, tight is tight. But if it's pushing in, you're going to have problems. So things such as pedal ratio, actual travel of the piston, which is typically set up by way of when this master cylinder is created. But pedal ratio, bore size, it all matters. There will be a lot more videos coming out on this because the most misunderstood portion of a braking system, in my opinion, is the master cylinder. Everybody thinks because they have 4-piston brakes or 2-piston aftermarket whatever that they're good to go. However, a master cylinder needs to be sized correctly to the brake system that's on the car. If it has 2-piston fronts and 4-piston rears, it's going to need a different master cylinder than a car that has 4-piston front, 4-piston rear, or 6-piston, 4-piston, however you want to put it together. The pedal ratio and master bore size is going to dictate the operating pressure that this puts out to your calipers, thereby changing how your brake system functions. Simply put, if you don't have enough pressure, you're never going to have good brakes. A lot of times people think because they have an aftermarket master cylinder, that's all they need to have good brakes. There are master cylinder sizes from 5/8 bore all the way up to 1 1/8 inches, and maybe even a little bit larger, and you can imagine how much that will change the feel and the operation of the brakes. One doesn't correlate with the other. They can't be used interchangeably. There's some things that we can change as far as pedal ratio to improve one or the other. But overall, if you have questions about a master cylinder recommendation, a size, a pedal ratio, we would love for you to give us a call. We love to just see our customers safe and sound, having proper operating brakes. A lot of times when a customer calls us, they'll end up uncovering the secrets, so to speak, of braking systems that nobody really likes to ever talk about. And as a result, they have better brakes than they've ever had before. Our goal at TBM Brakes is to have the best brakes on the planet. We want to have the best performing, the lightest, and the best stopping power. You can have all three in one, but your components have to work together, and you got to have good brakes to boot. So I want to share with you guys a couple of stories of how this can actually affect in the real world. Number one being, a customer called, they never bench bled the master cylinder, so they wanted to just do it on the car. Never a good idea. It's always best to bench bleed the master cylinder. If you don't know how that works, there's a million videos online. Basically, you fill it full of fluid, loop the lines back in here, and just pump them until the fluid is coming through straight. Because that orifice is so small, it's hard to bleed it on the car. It's a lot harder, especially when lines are connected. You'll never get it to work, and you're going to make a mess if you do try it. But because they had not bench bled it, and I actually have seen this while it's been bench bled, and this can also happen even if you do bench bleed it, because the rest of your system is going to be full of air. So this particular customer didn't have the right length push rod, so he just shoved it in here, preloaded it, put the bolt in the pedal, and continued to try and bleed it. He was impatient. He basically said, I think it's good, went to the track, went to push the brakes down, no brakes. Again,
This doesn't matter what brand brakes you have. If fluid is not entering any brand brake system, it's not going to work properly. These are the simple principles of hydraulics. So basically he got in, he called us and said, hey, my brakes aren't working. I'm like, well, okay. Brakes don't just not work. We test them on the bench here. It's a simple piston moving through a seal. Unless it's leaking and you have no fluid in the system, they're gonna work. It's really as simple as that. He said, no, they're not working. So eventually we uncovered the fact that, hey, your push rod's too long. He's like, yeah, but I got fluid in there. Basically what had happened was it went past that port, never got the system bled. So when he's pushing a pedal down, he may have had 25 or 50 PSI. It's scary to think somebody's going down a racetrack without a properly bled system or proper pressure going to the calipers. You know, there's all these SFI rules, there's all these rules in racing about window nets and seat belts, but honestly, brake systems are the most overlooked. Nobody even checks to see if they're functioning. There should be a pressure gauge on the caliper before they let you go down the racetrack. But there's nothing we could do at that point to make it work better because he's never getting the system bled, he's never getting fluid, and as a result, he's never getting pressure in the system. The second instance of having too long of a push rod and it preloading the master cylinder before they bleed or anything like that is that a customer called me and he said, I got a mile down the road. This actually has happened a lot of times in the last 2 years of us owning TBM. I got about a mile down the road. My brakes are smoking hot. The rotor's actually expanded and are now touching the calipers, which is our first indication that there's something really wrong. Our brakes to touch the caliper require steel to expand 70 to 100 thousandths. That's extreme heat. The only time you ever see that is when they're glowing hot in an emergency brake situation. I'm talking like 3,500 pound cars going 180, 90 miles an hour and their chute blows off. Or if a system's set up improperly, if you don't have enough braking system by means of pressure or a big enough caliper for the weight speed of the car, or you're not pulling a parachute and your car is really heavy and fast, that can be a possibility. The third one is just dumping tons of heat into it. So you have to imagine this guy pulls out of the driveway, his master cylinder is preloaded because this particular customer found a way to actually build pressure, but then it's not uncovering it. So when he lets off the pedal, there's still pressure in the system, so it's just dragging the pads for a mile. Lord knows how much pressure is on the system when he's doing that. He gets there, it makes the rotor glowing hot, the pad's hot, the rotor expands. If it was a true round rotor and it wasn't our TBM Revolution rotor, you would have to throw those round rotors away. They would likely be warped to the point of not being able to use. So no matter what style or brand, you're going to be in big trouble in that situation. So I said to him, is your push rod preloaded on your master cylinder? He's like, I don't know, it doesn't really feel loose. I'm like, well, if it doesn't feel loose when your foot's off the pedal, then that means it's going to be preloaded, most likely. So what he ended up doing was loosening the bolts, and then it loosened up, and then as a result, the brake caliper let go of the pads off the rotor, and he said, oh, that fixed it. Now I can drive it home safely. So he drove it home, fixed the pedal, everything is good. If you start with hot brakes, you're going to have even worse brakes by the end of the track. So whether it's dragging to the point where it's overheating your brakes and causing warpage or rotor growth, or it's just dragging a little bit going down the track, by the time you get to the end of the track, your pads are hot enough where they're going to surpass the heat threshold in the compound that's being used. So this does matter whether it's an extreme problem that it's causing for you or a little bit of a problem. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope this helped you gain some knowledge. Our goal is to improve your braking system. Like I said, any company, our brakes, somebody else's brakes, you need to know what is needed for a proper system, and all components need to match in the system to work properly. That's the only difference or thing keeping you from having a good brake system if you don't already. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We would love for you to watch some more of our Tech Tip Tuesdays. We got a ton more coming up for you.